Hello all, welcome to lesson 13 of the Rook Endgames series, another lesson about the pawn on the fourth rank. On the previous lessons we saw the separation from the king by one file to the file of the pawn. Now we are going to talk about two files, which is an improvement for the attacking side, of course. The more away the king is, the better for the attacking side. And here the technique is I bring the king to the front, so the rook harasses with the technique we already saw, the defensive frontal attacks. The king goes to a5, now the rook comes back. Of course here, if the rook goes to a8, this is just making it easier for white because we can advance immediately. And on the next move, we are going to cross the middle of the board. And if we cross the middle of the board, in principle, this is a win for the attacking side. Of course, we are going to reach a winning Scipione position. So over here the rook comes and attacks the pawn, so I need to first protect it with the king. I need to improve the best that I can the position of the king. So the harassment comes again, I go to a6, and now I am in a more close position for my king. And now starts the technique. We go behind the pawn. Notice that now the king will try to approach, of course, but we are able to also attack the enemy rook. Of course, here black can't just protect the rook because I check it, move away, and then thank you very much, easy win. So the rook needs to keep the position going to c5. And now it's where we start to advance the pawn. So here black has two options. Let's see first what happens if it stays on c8. Well, here we simply advance the pawn again. And even if the king tries to approach, I can simply check it and then force it to move away. We have reached this position. It's impossible for black to control anymore the promotion and so on. This is an easy win. But of course, black can also try to go to the side and cut the king from the side. But this changed very little. We simply advance the pawn. The king tries to go into Philidor position. We already also saw that in a previous lesson. Both the Scipione, Lucena position and the Philidor positions are two core lessons you should study to be really improving on this type of end games. Here we can check the king, and the king goes in front, which is a desired position when we are playing a field or from the defensive perspective. But the idea is we also at the attack have the perfect situation. Our pawn is ready to shield the king from a side check. So even if the rook tries to check it from the side, we just advance the pawn. So there's no way black can stop us from winning. So coming back to the back rank defense is the best idea, but of course we are playing with a bishop pawn, which is winning pawn. So if the king tries to stay at the corner, we go to the seventh. Now the king comes back. We threaten now to go to a8 and win the rook. So the king comes back to b8, and now the key move. We check it with the pawn. The king goes back, and then when it moves away, we win the rook. Next we will promote to the queen and win this easy end game. Here, let me go ahead a bit. Over here, we also, because the king is not still controlling the e4 square, we are able also to win with this more difficult technique from the side. The idea is the king now attacks the rook, but I can go to h4. Now the king comes back trying to reach the same situation as one file, but the king with one file was able to reach d6 immediately, which is the perfect situation for the defense. So here we can simply attack the rook goes to c5, and now I attack the rook again, and of course the rook needs to move away. There's no chance for the king to protect it, because then I can check it on d4. I'm talking about if it protects, then I check it, and then the rook is lost. So here the rook needs to come back, I advance the pawn. Now of course, with more or less trouble, this is a winning position, because I can go with the pawn more ahead, I can go in front of the pawn or not. Well, the king can try to approach, but this is a winning Scipione Lucena position. It's just a matter of knowing the technique, and now we are able to go, and as you can see, it's over. It's game over. So this was when we start with a bishop pawn. Let's move for a knight pawn, a very harder one. So here normally two files are not enough because our king has not enough space to maneuver along the two files on the short side. So here we need to try to trick black into a mistake. And the first way to try to trick it is to go with rook d2. So trying to make black make a mistake. If black knows what's doing, it will play the king e5. So the idea is to keep the king. We saw this on the one file lesson. It's similar. We need to stay with the king on the two ranks above the rank of the pawn. So to avoid the rook to be able to protect the pawn from the side, basically. And here there is no way white can win. Let's see some options. Let's go to the other side. Again, we attack the rook, and when the rook comes back, we just repeat the situation. So other options is to go, for example, with the king trying to go inside. If the king goes to a4, even easier for black, of course. Checking, the king goes in front. We need to keep protecting the pawn. So king c5 is the only move. Here, check again. So the defensive technique of the frontal attacks is working now. The king goes to b6, another check goes to a5, and so as you can see, white is not able to progress. Another check, the king goes to b3, and now don't make any mistake. We need to stay in front of the pawn. This is the only move that keeps the draw. And as you can see, we are in the starting position. There was no improvement. So from here, from this starting position, what we can learn is what happens if now, for example, well, let's say it makes the mistake of going away from the key positions, the key squares. Now it's different because I will be able to protect the pawn from the side. So now the king can't harass my rook. This is enough for me to make progressions. I go to this side, always go from with the king for the rook side, so it gets a better protection. The rook attacks, okay, attacking again. Of course, here attacking our rook is not enough because we simply can go to the seventh. We are going to use the seventh rank to shield our king. So when the situation arrives like this, we are going to block with our rook and be able to win. So this doesn't work, attacking our rook. So here black goes again with another check, and as you can see, the difference now is we are not forced to use our king to protect the pawn, and so we can go with the king attacking the rook. Of course, the rook can come to b5; it's going to be attacked, and then we advance the pawn. Other situations is with the king attacking our rook, but this is obviously a clear mistake because we just keep protecting. Now the rook is attacked again, and so we repeat and advance the pawn. And from here, as you can see, it's a very easy Scipione Lucena winning position for white. So this was with the king from the starting position. Let me go over here. So with this kind of mistake. Another mistake would be, for example, sorry for that, would be, for example, this move. What happens over here? Well, now the rook is not with enough distance from the pawn, and this makes all the difference because now our king can progress harassing the rook. So there will be a time. Now the pawn is attacked, so I need to keep protecting. Don't forget that white wants to advance the pawn because if the pawn crosses the middle of the board, it's going to be an easier win. And now we simply attack the rook. The rook is forced to move away from the defensive protection, and so we can advance the pawn, and this is a Scipione Lucena winning position again. What else? What else can I see over here? Let me see what I have. Maybe, okay, we saw this, we saw this. Let's see what happens if the rook goes to the side. So this is pretty easy. We simply advance the pawn, and so it's the same situation. It's very direct. So this was when we are playing with the knight. Don't forget that we try to trick black, but if black knows what it's doing. The king just keeps the perfect situation, rook in front of the pawn. We keep the defensive frontal attacks technique ready, and there's no progression for white. Let's finish this with a different situation. We have a central pawn again. Of course, this is a win, but here I'm going to show it from the perspective where the enemy king is on the short side. What happens over here? Well, black can try to use the defensive side checks technique, but it won't work. It won't work, and it will be really easy. At first, this is the perfect situation. So the king is in a perfect situation, the rook also in a perfect defensive situation. So the first maneuver uh, we should consider is to force the black to move over here. And how we do that? We just move the rook to b2. So the king now comes to a4. We are going to see what happens if the king goes to a6. Okay, let's see. If it goes to a6, then I can come with my king. Let's see what happens. Because over here I'm threatening checkmate. The rook needs to attack again, or the king needs to move, and let's say, for example, over here, and I simply can advance the pawn. So the king needs to come to a4 to keep this threat not available. I go to the other side with the rook. The king comes to a5, and now I get the same position. This is exactly the same position, the same starting position, but now it's black to play. And with black to play, it needs to abandon the defensive ideal position. And let's say, for example, it goes with the king to a4. Now we use this very, very, very interesting maneuver, interesting move. We should also be aware of it, which is we advance the pawn. Brilliant. Why this is possible? Because if the rook takes, then I am threatening checkmate, and at the same time the rook. So I'm going to win the rook, and it's game over. Because we have this situation, what happens if the king moves? Then we can progress, as we saw. So let's see what happens if the rook comes to try the defensive side checks. Well, we advance the pawn. The defensive sides over here don't work because check. I move the king to c4, check, but now I'm threatening checkmate. This is the problem of this situation. So the king is in the short side, so we can explore it to our advantage. Of course, this is only possible because the king was two files cut off from the pawn. Again, of course, this is also important. Otherwise, this would be different. This would be a different talk. And so, because over here the king needs to avoid the checkmate, let's say going over here, well, we can advance the king, we can advance the pawn, whatever. This is going to be a win for white. So without this option, there is another possibility here for black, which is to cut off our king from progressing. And okay, this may be posing some problems because now I can't support the pawn, and so maybe I'm wondering, okay, but what I can do if I advance the pawn? There's this simple technique that we learn on the rook versus pawns and games. We got a lesson where we understood that cutting the king was the perfect situation to attack the pawn, because when the pawn advances, then I attack the pawn, and if the pawn advances again, I check it and take the pawn again. And so we may be wondering what happened over here, and simple is we simply advance the pawn anyway. Because why? Because we are going to be able to attack the rook and again threat checkmate at the same time. And so the rook can't come and use this technique we learned from the rook versus pawns and games. And the best option for black now is to go to, for example, another move. Let's say, for example, this one. And when the pawn advances, try to control the promotion. This looks also possible, but again, when the rook takes, I simply use the same situation where I attack the rook and I am threatening checkmate, so black is lost anyway. Okay, I hope you have enjoyed all these maneuvers on this lesson. and I hope you are improving the Rook and Games technique. See you in future lessons. Bye bye.